Thank you very much. Well, as Jackie let you know, my name is Jaime Garzon. I am an assistant extension professor and dairy forage educator at the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. And today I was invited to present this topic about hayland and pasture fertility facing climate change. So of course, thank you very much for the invitation and I hope that you enjoy it. So to start the presentation, usually people when they start looking, imagine grasslands like haylands, they they usually have this perspective. So actually, when you are thinking in a pasture, like in a prairie, you will imagine something that is very homogeneous, that you have like one plant that is growing in the pasture, maybe some trees, maybe some animals. Of course, you can see the sheep over in the bottom. But actually, what is happening there is not only something that is homogeneous, something that is horizontal. Actually, in there, we are having an interaction between many, many factors that is happening between soil, between the plant, the animal, and even the air. And nowadays, we know that the situation is not linear. Before, we used to think that, okay, the interaction are soil, plant, and animal, linear. Nowadays, we know that that is not the situation. From that specific point was the concept of soil fertility appears. So actually, this is like an old definition that came from a dictionary, that soil fertility is the soil ability to sustain agricultural plant growth. When we see this in this concept, we are looking that the soil in that case is acting as a tool for the forage. It's almost to say that actually the soil is under the forage because its only function is just to provide sustain and nutrient, just that. With the research and knowing the impact in climate change and environment, later in the decades after, because that definition appears in the Green Revolution approximately, a new definition of soil fertility appears. That is that complex process involving nutrient cycling between organic and inorganic forms. This is interesting to change because here we are seeing now the situation in a cycle, like in a circle. It's not linear for one part. And the second, we are including now organic and inorganic forms. So there will be an advance in that situation. And some factors that are depending the soil fertility is the mineral proportion, is to know how much nutrients we have over there, how much nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, calcium, and others. How is the aeration and the water holding capacity? That is very related with the porosity of the soil. And finally, how is the texture? Because with that, we can imagine things about the management and how could be the transference of nutrients between the soil itself and the soil with the plant. Even with that, that was a definition that was before the new century, before the 2000. It applies for many ways and actually is a very chemical perspective of what is happening with the soil. Now we are talking about climate smart practices. We are talking about more about the environment, resilience, climate change. A new definition appears that like cover more what is happening in all those cycles. So the soil health. Soil health is the soil continued capacity to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. Yeah. So you can see here that with this definition, we are considering first a big change. We are considering the soil as a living ecosystem. It is not that the soil is just there to sustain plants, like employed by the plants. Now we are seeing the soil as a living thing. And second, look the equation in there. Another definition is that soil health could be inherent soil quality plus dynamic soil quality. That inherent part refers to the chemical, the things that we saw in the previous slide. But now we are adding that dynamic soil quality. In here, we are considering the microorganisms in the soil. And I think, I consider that if we are talking about resilience of climate change in pastures, in haylands, we need to consider how our actions are impacting the microorganisms in the soil. when we are applying fertilization, when we are making some tilling, so plowing, putting any plant over there, we are making that impact, not only for the plant as over that above ground part, but also below ground, also to the soil. That's very important. And talking about now with this new concept, well, new, it's not that new, but even so, we're not talking about more about soil characteristics. That now is being short about what is happening. Now we're talking about soil functions because it covers more definition in there. Mainly for the soil health, we are talking about nutrient cycling, and this is not only the linear path that I told you. Here we are also including the atmosphere. So actually, all those 4 factors that I told you at the beginning. The second, the carbon sequestration and nitrogen fixation. Those are becoming very, very important nowadays because all the economic impact of the carbon markets. So nowadays, people are more interested in what is happening with the carbon sequestration, what is fixing more, what is sequestrating more, if a crop or a pasture or a forest. And then nitrogen fixation, I will talk about that later related to the legumes. With water infiltration and soil structure, similar characteristics before, same situation with the aeration, and finally, weeds and pest controls. In this one, it's important because when you have a soil that has good health, the soil will have enough population, diversity of microorganisms that will defend themselves against another possible pathogens. Something that maybe is not common over there, maybe a foreign invasor pathogen that is coming that may affect your plants. But if you have a soil with good health, the same soil will defend against that pathogen. And that for sure, it will benefit you and your production. When we pass these soil functions to economic benefits, now we are seeing all this part of the right in your case, we can see that some benefits that for providing, increasing, having into account the soil health is better plant growth, quality, and yield, of course, because we are improving the nutrient cycling, we are increasing the organic matter, and we are providing more nutrients for next cuts, for next harvests. We are also reducing risk of yield loss by environmental stress that is very related with resilience. And that is important because nowadays we have no idea what is happening with a flood that is not expected, with some drought, or even today that is snow. Here in Maine at least. So for us, that was not expected, and that is something that the soil health can help to cope. Better field accessing wet periods, very related with texture, and that's important because even with that, supposedly we are in the muddy season. So actually, by having organic matter in our soil, will make the situation more sandy, more vulnerable. It will help in the long term to enter to those fields, we don't get stuck. And finally, all of those factors together, it will reduce field costs, of course. So this is the first breakout, and I want to invite you all. These are the questions, and my friends in the administrative part will lead you how we'll do this. Okay, everyone can see my screen again? Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for all the participation in the breakout. That was very, very interesting to know what are your expectations in this presentation. So now that we talk about soil health, now what the importance that is related to know, preserve, or even increase the soil health in our farms. So I can start talking about the climate smart Hayland management. I decided to try to focus this presentation in these 4 main topics to, at the end, speak about some practices that we can use. For sure, it's important to notice that we need to have a careful management and monitoring in all of these 4 topics, because that is something that it's important that we know what is happening to detect the problems at the moment they are appearing and resolve it. and the moment when it happened. So the first topic that I want to speak is the forage budgeting. This is, what's this? Oh, okay, no idea. This is the, how to determine how much forage our farm are producing to fulfill the requirements of our selling proposal or for our animals. So actually being that the case, we have these three topics related to forage budgeting. The first one is about the soil. When you want to check, when you determine about hayland management, first of all, you need to know which area do you have available for your pastures. So specifically in acres, in which location. But it's important also that you try to look to know how is your storage capacity. It's not only to have a lot of acres that you can plant if you don't have the appropriate place to make an appropriate storage. And I say that is because it may happen sometimes that producers, especially when the growing season is when put the first or the second cut, that a lot of forages has been produced, and you pack that and you make that the bales, but at the end you don't have a space to put those bales after. And I saw those bales later in the middle of nowhere, basically outside, getting rain, getting moisture. And by doing that, that is an excellent way to lose money, because all the effort that you are doing, it will be lost because that bale that is not protected, it is losing quality. And without quality, you cannot sell that bale. Or maybe you can use it for other purposes, as a straw, for example. So it's important to consider, if you are producing hay, please have a barn, have a place with a roof just to protect against the rain, against the moisture, the humidity. If possible, if you have the means, grab that. There is all a possibility. But try to maintain, and of course, also try to protect those against water. The second factor is the plant. And in this case, we need to know approximately how is the biomass accumulation or the yield of the grass that we are choosing, and also the nutritive value, the quality of that grass. Because for this is the responses that you're selling to your customers. And finally, we have the animal. In this case, with the animal, that could be something that you have on your farm or maybe not. So in this case, you are having this situation with the animal if you're producing hay for feed your own farm, this is something that you need to have in mind. The number of animals, the average weight, and the physiological state, because you need to know how much forage you need to produce to fulfill the requirements, the nutritional requirement of those animals per year. Okay? Later, when we are talking about the biomass accumulation, we're also talking about how is the yield moving across the year. And here in the Northeast region, the characterization is important with those plants that are adapted to cold weather, to cool season. Of course, many of our plants are seed-tree, and because of that, we are having this situation with high harvest, high amount of biomass at the beginning of the year. Later, we are having our summer slump, that everything will decrease, and later we have another little peak at the end of the year. So by doing this, we already know how much be the distribution of the grass that we are producing, more at the beginning of the year, the first, maybe the second cut if possible. And probably if you will have a second or a third cut, that will be at the end of the year, having this proportion of biomass. Also, we have, when we're talking about the forage quality, here this concept is interesting because you can divide that concept of quality between these two topics. For one is the forage nutritive value, and you also have the animal voluntary intake. For the reason of this presentation, I will focus in the part of the nutritive value, that is what is interested now. And with that, there is some responses that you need to check to see if you are doing well. With the chemical composition, you can check how is the dry matter of your hay. Ideally, your hay should be with maximum 20% of humidity. So actually, we are talking about approximately 80% of dry matter. Ideally, you need to go until almost 50%. 20 is in the case that you have square bales that are not that big issue, but with big bales, I would recommend that you maintain a moisture of 50% or less. For the crude protein, the idea is to have at least 7%. That at least minimum. Usually in our region, you could find that grasses are from 13, 15% of crude protein, and that's good. Legumes can go higher until 20, 25. But for sure, having your hay above 10%, it's something fine, it's something good. Higher, better. With the fibers, we have the NDF, the ADF, and the lignin. And in this case, with the NDF, if you go higher, it could be a problem. Usually, what is expected is that you should not go higher than 60%. If you go higher, that means that you are producing more fiber than soluble nutrients. So actually, because of that, the quality will decrease. With the TDN, in that case, it's the soluble sugars. Again, with this one, higher is better. The ideal number is 70% as well. And finally, with the minerals, that will depend on what animals you are selling. So actually, this ideal concentration will be different for horses than for sheep, than for cattle. And finally, with the digestibility, it's also important that in this case, the digestibility, it's a response that you can check that will represent the energy of your forage. So actually, going energy and protein and fibers are like the main three things that you need to check. And with the digestibility, higher is better. So actually, when we're talking about 60% digestibility, 70% digestibility, that should be better for your hay. And just to have all this information, that is at least here in the Northeast region, we have these two labs that I usually recommend to people send forage samples to there to analyze. Cumberland Valley and Derry. Both are good, both are very reliable, and they will give you all these responses from what you can evaluate the quality that the forage that you are producing. So this is the part when I'm talking about that forage budgeting that is important to have. Now we can pass to the next one. The next one is the species selection. This is tricky because in our market, we can find a lot of different species and different varieties. The question is, which is better for my soil? Which is better for my farm? To know what species choose for your farm, I would recommend you to follow these three steps, like these three factors. The first one, you need to decide what is the objective of this Hayland that you want, of this field. So, and of course, of the plant that you want to sow. So you should be going with an annual or a perennial. Your idea, for example, is to fulfill a gap of productivity that you have in a specific field, or do you want to produce a new Hayland that will be perennial for many years? It should be cool season or warm season. So in some cases, you want to improve, like increase the amount of biomass you're producing in summer. And because of that, you can plan some annual warm seasons that will help you doing that. And finally, it will be a grass, a legume, or a forb. So actually with the grass, you know that you are like focusing on productivity. With legume, you're focusing on quality. And with forbs, you are going for diversity. So what is your objective in there? After you decide that, you can go, okay, I know what I want. Now, how is the soil that I have available? With the soil characteristics that you need to know for an appropriate species selection, you need to check the slope, the pH, the moisture or drainage of that place, and the concentration of nutrients. So by doing this, you can sample the soil and make a soil test. There is usually laboratories in the universities, in part of extension, or even private companies that make these tests. And it is important because depending on those characteristics, you will know that there are some plants that are better adapted to neutral soils, but can stand in acid soils. There are other ones that are better in basic soils, and those are all available in our market. So you need to know which pH you have to select better what is happening. And talking about that, something that happening to me here. I know some producers that, for example, here in Maine, the alfalfa is something that many producers want to plant, want to sow, because it's a very good legume. It will fix a lot of nitrogen. It will increase a lot the quality of your hay, and it's productive. The situation with the alfalfa is alfalfa doesn't like acid soils. So if you have a pH below 6.5, the alfalfa will not grow there. And there are some producers that have the idea that, okay, maybe if I can apply lime and I can go from there, change the pH of the soil to finally have the alfalfa. That's correct, that's a possibility. But the situation is, if you are going from that way, you will spend a lot of time and you will spend a lot of money by doing that. So trying to adapt your farm to a specific species, I consider that maybe is not an appropriate perspective, it's appropriate focus. It is better to adapt the plants that are available to your soils, because that is an easy way to go. With moisture and drainage, same situation. There are plants that can stand better with high moisture or low high drainage. There are another one that cannot. So usually ones will stand better with flood and other will stand better in drought. You need to choose which is better with you, what do you need. And finally, with the nutrients, is just to know what do you need to supplement if that is the case. And finally, for the miscellaneous, another perspective that you need to consider, what is the market availability? That species is available in the market? Maybe not, maybe yes. Then something that you need to check. What tractor do you have and what implement? Because as we listened before, the no-till method probably will need a no-till drill seeder. So do you have that implement or not? And finally, with the management, I refer here is how much time do you want to spend in this new pasture? It will be something that you want to plant far of your house and you will not check it until 3 or 4 months later, or that is something that you will focus on just review and check every week. Depending on that, the species also will change. So that is because it's important to have that into consideration. And by knowing that, those are the options I know we have at least here in Maine. You can go with cool season perennials, you can go with cool season annuals, and you can go with warm season annuals. And for the productivity of haylands, just dedicated more to hay production, I would recommend the ones that are involved, depending on the soil, of course. So for cool season perennials, you can go with fescues that are very adaptable. The timothy, the orchard grass are very productive. And if you want to go with legumes, you can go with alfalfa or clovers. With cool season annuals, that depending of the time of the year, you can go with triticale, maybe with oats or with rye. And with warm season annuals, you can go with that just for summer. You can go with Sudan grass, with millet, or even with crabgrass for horses. Another topic that is important that I want to introduce here is what is happening with the legumes. This is not a new topic, has been researched and mentioned in many, many places. But usually when you talk about legumes, people usually dedicate the thoughts and just focus in how much it will impact the yield of my pasture and the nutritive value. That is important, of course, but we need to realize that that is not the only ecosystem services that the legumes are providing to our pastures. As you can see, those two are just one component, one category of the provisioning category of ecosystem services. By having legumes in our hay fields, in our pastures, we are also providing nitrogen fixation. We are increasing the litter decomposition. So actually we are releasing nutrients quicker and higher quantity of our soils. We are regulating greenhouse gas emissions and we are increasing diversity. And more diversity usually means better soil health and more resilience. And for sure, we also have a cultural category. And at least in my case, when I see those flowers of legumes in our pastures, it looks better for me as well. This is like the first main characteristic that you want to check when you are working with legumes. It's like the important one. And it's because the legumes has this nitrogen fixation ability to take nitrogen from the air and put it in the soil, just directly. In this table, I just compiled some information about very specific legume crops and how much they can fix by being monoculture, for example, for a cover crop, as could happen with alfalfa, with field pea, with clovers, and also how the fixation by having 30% of cover. That usually the recommended proportion for grazing or for haylands. Looking at, even if we are going from a range from 20 until 300 pounds of nitrogen per acre that the legume is fixing to our fields. And considering that usually the minimum value that we want to have of nitrogen supplementation, nitrogen fertilization is 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre, you can see that that will be covered with our legumes having just 30% of cover. So that is something that our legume is providing and we don't have to pay. Talking about fertilization, now we can pass from species selection to a third one, that is the nutrient management. To speak about climate smart practices for what is nutrient providing and nutrient management in our pastures, I will always recommend to follow this 4R concept. Basically, just follow the right source, the right rate, the right time, and the right place. Why I'm saying that? Because we're going to the right source. In the market, if we are going like chemical fertilizers, you can find that there will be urea, it could be ammonium diphosphate, it will be ammonium nitrate. There is some sources that we can use for applying nitrogen. If you are going for organic, you can go and find manure from pig, manure from cow, manure from poultry. So the situation in this, and I will talk with this in the next slides, the situation in this is you need to know what is available in the market and how much nutrient that source is providing to your pasture. And that's why the next one is to decide what is the right rate. Depending on the necessity of the crop, depending on the situation of your soil, the amount of nutrients will change that you need to apply. So this is why it's important to have the soil test and to previous by having all the hayfield established, you need to know which kind of nutrient you need to apply and in what amount. And usually that is something that you will provide it with the soil test. When we are talking about the right time, there is something important is to provide those nutrients when the plant needs it, and when the plant can absorb it. I say this is because one of the recommendations that I do for the nitrogen specifically, usually the rest of the nutrients, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, calcium, you can apply all of those at the moment where you are seeding your pasture, just at the beginning of the growing season. The nitrogen is different because nitrogen is very mobile. They like to move around the plant, around the soil, around the water. So because of that, the best moment to apply nitrogen is when you are sure that the plant can absorb it and not leave it to microorganisms, not leave it to the soil or be lixiviated to underground water. So because of that, usually the recommendation for the nitrogen, for example, is to apply that after the first cut on the year. Why? Because at that moment, you know that your grass will be starving for food, starving for nitrogen, because it needed to regrow again. And at that moment, you know also that it's awake, that the roots are working. So all the nitrogen that will apply, it will be absorbed. At least in this case with nitrogen, I'm telling that again. And finally, with the right place, something that is important is just to fulfill that. If, for example, if you're applying a lot of nitrogen, great amount of that nitrogen could be lixiviated and reach some streams or reach some ditches. So because of that, it's important also to figure out and know how much nutrients your plant need and try to not going after that, trying to. So we're talking about fertilization, like chemical fertilizers. Something that happened before and is happening also at this moment is this concept of chemical fertilization was very popular some years ago because what the prices was not that high. After the 2000, those prices of fertilizations are increased a lot. Even at the moment, they are reducing again, but still is very expensive to pay for fertilization, to pay for lime, for example. Even the lime is expensive at this moment. So, and of course, the fertilization, the chemical fertilizers, is not an option for organic productions. So because of that, a common question that has come in also is, okay, what is better, the manure or the fertilizer? And I will respond, both are good, because everything depends on the production that you have, and each farm is unique. But something that it's important to have into account is that when you are applying manure, you are not only applying nitrogen, that is like the main element that the grass will need. You are also applying by default phosphate and potash. So when you are buying, when you are having manure, it is possible to know what concentration of this component that manure has. It will improve to your management because you will know how much nutrients you are applying to your hayfield. For example, in this case, this is from reference. You can see how is the differences between the manure from dairy, from horses, from poultry. In comparison, we have the dairy one that is 1.4 nitrogen percent of nitrogen, and the poultry is 3.3%. But looking what happened with the phosphate. With dairy, the phosphate is just 0.9, but with poultry is 4.8. So that is a situation that we need to take into account. And going on the other side with the fertilizer, the benefit that we have over there is the concentration of nutrients. Because if with the manure we're having 3.5 tons of nitrogen, with urea we're having 46. So those are like the advantages of the fertilization, but the situation that would change with the costs. So just for going a little deeper with this topic, I just want to make a quick exercise here, just to roll quick numbers. Considering this nitrogen that we have here, like the proportion of nitrogen in this slide, now we want to apply enough nitrogen to fulfill this requirement that was given for our soil tests. We need to apply 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre. That is what we need to apply. And we have, again, those proportion, those percentage of nitrogen in each of those manures that are from the past slide. Going again with dairy, if we have some dairy manure that is 1.4% of nitrogen, to fulfill these 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre, we will need to apply 3,500 pounds of manure per acre. It will change if we have, for example, poultry manure, where it's 3.3% of nitrogen. Again, to fulfill these 50 pounds, we will need to apply 1,500 pounds of manure. So you can see here the difference between one or the other manure. If we are going to do with the fertilizers, we are with those 34, 20, or 46%, we can see that the proportion of fertilization that we will need, it will be less. And the second situation is, okay, go again with manure. So with manure, with the dairy manure. We know that we are applying 3,500 pounds of manure, right? By applying this 3,500 pounds, automatically we're also applying 32 pounds of phosphate and 105 pounds of potash. That could be a situation if you have enough amount of potassium on your soil, because that potash will end in the ditch. It will end in some water body. So look what happened with the poultry. 1,500 pounds of poultry manure that we are applying, and because of that, we are applying at the same time 72 pounds of phosphate. Again, usually for many pastures, the recommendation is maybe 30, maybe 20 pounds of phosphate per acre. So here we are having a plus, a big plus, that your plants will not consume, your soil will not fix, and will end on the underground water by lixiviation. So that is the situation that you really need to take care if we want to be resilient and take care also with the environment. And of course, the comparison between prices, for example, going to 700, 600 of dollars per ton to 60 of manure is understandable. Why do prefer to use manure if we are not going organic? And finally, our last methodology here for climate smart practices with Haylands is the harvest management. In here, I want to divide this topic in two different factors: frequency and intensity. And actually, these factors will be important for increase the durability, for the standard performance of your hay across years. Why I say that? First thing is the frequency. The frequency is basically how often I can harvest my hay, my grass, my pasture on the year to have a appropriate performance across years. So usually the recommendation like that you will find in many literature is when to harvest when the grass reaches 12 to 15 inches pasture height. Personally, I don't like that concept because that height will depend not only of the species, but it will also change depending on the weather conditions. It will change if your grass was stressed for some drought, if the soil has not enough nutrients, or even if have some crop in the a site that will project shade. Because all of that, those inches of height will change. That's why my main recommendation to know when to start harvesting a pasture, it should be when the seed head starts to appear. That is like a physiological response of the grass. And we are looking for that bud stage is for the figure that we have on the left. In there, the green graph, the green line, is the productivity, the biomass, the performance of that pasture, the yield. So you can see that at the beginning, all the seedlings are growing, or maybe now that the growing season is starting, the grasses are just start growing. They are trying to move all the nutrients that they have from the roots to the leaves and start growing. And later they have a peak of productivity. Of course, you may think that the best way is to wait until the moment that we are reaching that plateau, that roof, and at that moment we can harvest, because that is the moment that we will have more biomass to collect, to harvest, and to sell later. But at the same time, when we are seeing this increasing biomass, all that biomass is being sustained by fibers. And those fibers will decrease the quality of your hay. That's why if you are seeing one line going up, that is the lignin, but other line going down with the protein, TDN, and palatability. So actually, the yield is increasing, but the quality is decreasing, just at the same time. That's why the best moment, the optimum moment for harvest is when those two lines intersect, and when those two lines match. At that moment is when it's appropriate to harvest. And usually that happens is when the seed heads starts to appear. But you will say also it's not easy. Well, maybe the pasture is not homogeneous. Maybe it's not easy to see that the whole pasture will bloom at the same time. Yeah, that's right. But for that, my recommendation is when you are deciding how to harvest, the best way is when you see that your hay field, 30% of that hay field is bloom. It's bloom. It has the seed heads. If you see this 30%, you can assume that the majority of your pasture will be in this bud stage. And that is the appropriate moment to harvest. The second concept is the intensity. So we talked before about when start cutting. The intensity refers when stop cutting. In this case, we want to know is how short should be the stubble height after we pass the animals or the machinery of the tractor, the mower. In this case, the main recommendation is just to go for grasses 4 inches, for legumes 7 inches. And why is that? It's because at the bottom, all grasses need to preserve some growing points where they still have sugars, still have food to regrow. And it will be even better if you let some green leaves over there to make photosynthesis. By doing that, you are giving the plant the tools for start growing again. Some people also, they ask me, but if you are decreasing the stable height, you are increasing the amount of biomass that you are collecting. So actually, by going not for forcing over 3, maybe 2 inches, you are increasing the yield of the pasture. And that's right. But the problem is that by doing that, probably you are decreasing the performance of your pasture for the next cut, maybe for the next year. And because we are talking about the resilience, that is important. If you have legumes, those plants grow slower and they need more care. That's why usually when you have legumes on your pasture, the idea is to increase this stable height from 4 to 7 inches, just to protect the legume, because at the end, you don't want that the grass will cover all the legume, I will kill it, and will eliminate that from your pasture. So those are the first 2 things, the frequency and the intensity. By following that, maybe you will not have any issue. Maybe you will follow the instructions correctly. But when you are trying to do things different and don't follow in these numbers, usually this is the result. In this case, when you don't give the plants enough time or enough nutrients to regrow, other plants will start taking that into advantage. And that is the way when you can start seeing degraded haylands. And that is common. You will see these 4 factors. So perennial weeds start to appear because the grass is weakened. So actually it's weak. So the perennial weeds can start blooming and dispersing. After that, wood species will invade. That will increase the acidity of the soil, and they will appear some rocks on the surface, and you start over and over. So that's why I think the main important thing here is make your grass strong. If you make your grass strong, it will control the weeds, it will control the pathogens, and for sure, it will provide better control over the pasture. But in this case, if you have this situation and it's not that everything is lost, always there is a solution. And if you're interested, I left you here this QR code for a bulletin that we produce. So how to recover those old hay fields through renovation. And we are going to the second breakout. I know that this is like dense topic, but I just want to know, what do you think about that? Okay. Let me share my screen for the last time. Sharing. Slideshow. Okay. Everyone can see my slides? Great. So promise is, I am just finishing. This is the live breakout. So just finishing this presentation. Well, now we're talking about what are those like climate smart practices, more important practices like methods, I would say, or considerations. There is some practices that I think we also can having in mind in our operations, just to fulfill the situation with the climate change. The first one, and was one of the first questions that we have in the previous breakout, what can we do if our windows for dry our grasses are being short? It is being short. That is usually something that is happening more nowadays. In that before we have 5 days, 6 days available with no rain to dry our forages on the field. These last 2 years, there has been maybe those windows reduced to maybe 3 days, maybe less. So that's a problem, of course, because for producing hay, we need to dry those forages. One of the possible conditions, one of the possible ways that we have to making this process fast is with the conditioning and tedding. One of the disadvantages of this is not a cheap way to do things, because for sure, if you want to go with conditioning and with tedding, you will need the implements to do that. So maybe this could be a good choice if you're thinking in long term, maybe in a couple of years saving, maybe with the help of some of the NRCS, the SARE or something that will help you to compile the expense of having this machinery. What is the advantage? When you're talking about hay conditioning, that is a modification that you are having in the implement that is collecting, that is harvesting the grass. Because now you will have, besides the mowing and the transporting, you are also having a roller that are crushing the stems of those grasses. When you do that, you are providing more escape for the moisture of that grass to escape. And because of that, the process of drying, it will be faster. With the tedding, now you are talking about spread that grass that you just cut in wide swaths. And by doing that, more surface you will be reached by the sun that you have at that moment. So in this figure that we have over there, we can see that by having the two technologies, maybe one or the other, always the time of drying, it will be reduced if you have both. That is something for sure. And you can see that in this case, we are seeing a comparison of 4 or 5 hours just by having one or other technology. Of course, as I said, it's kind of expensive, but it's an option in the case that we want to just take advantage of those short times that we are having of sunny days, maybe with this technology. The second one is the no-till seeding. And this is one of the questions that I also have in the first break. This is another method that we can comply if you want to increase the diversity of your pasture, if you want to increase the quality by seeding legumes inside the already established pasture, and of course, if you want to increase the quality of your hay. So some important points in here. First, you need to select the right time and the right species to plant. Usually when you are applying this no-till seal, the main control that you need to provide is the control against the grass that is growing over there. Because consider, you have an established grass that has all the roots very, very well distributed, all the leaves that are making photosynthesis. And in that, you are putting a little seed, a little seedling that will start growing. That's why it's important to reduce the performance of the established grass. There is some option by doing that. Usually the main recommendation is by mowing, because in this case, you want to give the space for this new legume to grow. That's a good excuse. That's a good situation just to go under the 2 inches of stubble height. But it's just because you want to give the opportunity to the legume. There are not many exceptions of that rule. There are people also, if you are not organic, that they can also apply herbicide, but in a very low concentration, just to stunt the growth of the grass. Or even there are people that after they go with the seeding, they just apply a line of herbicide, just going like by hand, applying a line of herbicide just to that line of grass to weaken the grass and give space for the legume to grow. The third point is fertilization post-seed. It is important that you give the nutrients that the legume needs. In this case, you need to select, you need to give more care about the legume than the grass. So, being the case, I will recommend you, if you are doing no-till seeding with legumes, after that, apply phosphorus and potassium to the pasture. Very important to not apply more nitrogen over there. Because if you apply nitrogen, you are first increasing the growth of the grass. That means that the grass will cover faster the legume and will be very difficult for the legume to reach the sunlight. And second, by having that increase of nitrogen in the soil, you will impact the nitrogen fixation of the legume. Because for sure, the legume will be preferred to take the nitrogen of the fertilizer and not make all the process for establish those microorganisms that will help the fixation. Because of that, usually when you have a mixed pasture with legumes and grasses, you can stop applying nitrogen. And the last one, be careful with the stubble height in upcoming cuts. If you have a full orchard grass, a full grass Hayland, you know that the stubble height for that is usually 4 inches. Now that you have a legume, you know you need to increase that to 5, 6 inches. From that moment to the future, you need to fix that just to protect the growth of the legume. And finally, other situation with the no-till seeding can be considered that is not that cheap methodology, because for sure you will need one of these. This is the no-till drill seeder that for sure you will need for apply no-till seed. If you want to buy one, that's fine. At least here in Maine, I don't know how could be the situation in other states, but here in Maine, if you don't have the no-till seed, you have the opportunity to ask some of these institutions, the MOFGA and the Volknecht Center, just for having that renting, the borrowing program, in where literally they have the implement, you can put it on your operation, on your farm, use it, of course, clean it, and return it. That's a good way to do, at least with this part of no-till seeding. And also because not only for Hayland, but also because no-till seeding is also very good methodology for cover crops, if you're interested in that. And the third practice that I want to talk today is the frost seed. And this it's like important nowadays because we are in the moment to do frost seeding. This is an excellent option for clover seeding in established hay fields. Alfalfa will also be seeded in this way. Here, as we talk with the no-till seeding, the same situation is when you can to introduce a new legume in a hay field is just to control the growth and the competition of the grass. What could be a better control than the winter? Because of that, the situation with the frost seeding need to be done at the right time with the right species, and very important, the right time, because the frost seeding only works when the nights are frozen, but the days are not. So actually, you are needing the ice to open cracks in the surface of the soil, but later on the day, that ice get water, transformed to water, to help that that moisture that the seeds need to start growing. And the good thing is actually clover and alfalfa, that are the two main crops that I would recommend to do this. They are tolerant to cold. They are tolerant to these very low temperatures. Second is sowing broadcast, manually or with rotary spreader. I will recommend you to do this broadcasting. It's because it's not highly recommendable to go inside these pastures, those fields, in this moment. If you are going in this moment, it will be, you will get stuck, highly probable. So usually the recommendation for the frost seeding, and because we are taking advantage of those cracks that are opened by the ice, you don't need a disc or something to open the soil. Because of that, you can go by hand. Even I saw here some people with buggies. They just has someone in the back with the machine just rotating and dispersing the seeds over all the field in that case. That works as well. Important, the seeds need to reach the soil surface. I'm saying this is because in old hay fields, where they have literally a layer this thick of dead grass, for the seeds, it will be very difficult to reach the soil, passing by that thick layer. So that's why if you're planning to do frost seeding, a good recommendation could be maybe have a very good mowing before the winter starts. Or just to get advantage to that. Or other situation that is not common, but other thing that I saw is, for example, passing the seeder and later, early in the morning, going with the buggy or with the tractor and just like maybe some trunks or some chains, just to move that grass to make sure that the seed reach the soil. Those are the other options. And finally, if you are interested in this topic, in the methodology, there is also a fact sheet of the University of Maine Cooperative Extension that you can check over this QR code. And well, this is the topic that I want to bring to you. I just want to make a little information slide about the Mainers. If you are interested, I opening this year this program, the Mayhay contest. So for the Mainers that want to participate in this is the QR code. In there you can find the rules. I'm looking with where are the best farms to produce hay. There will be awards, there will be recognition, and of course, a very good opportunity to meet with people. So if you are interested, just check that QR code and we'll be very happy to provide you information later. And that's all. Thank you very much for your attention. I think that, well, of course, if you want to make questions now, I think we have time, almost. And if not, there is my email address if you want just to reach out.